It, the most fascinating mastermind man can conceive. A monster that can control all sources of the Earth's power. Able to pull man-made spaceships from their orbits. Making of those it chooses slaves. You'll know terror to freeze your blood. You'll feel the heart-stopping strength of the most fearful monster ever known. It conquered the world.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, Bradford!
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
Today we're talking about It Conquered the World from 1956.
It Conquered the World was produced and directed by Roger Corman. Written by Lou Rusoff with an uncredited rewrite by Charles B. Griffith.
It Conquered the World stars Peter Graves as Dr. Paul Nelson, Lee Van Cleef as Dr. Tom Anderson, Beverly Garland as Claire Anderson, Sally Fraser as Joan Nelson, Russ Bender as General James Pattick, Taggart Casey as Sheriff N.J. Shallert, Karen Kadler as Dr. Ellen Peters, Dick Miller as Sergeant Neil, Jonathan Haze as Corporal Manuel Ortiz, Paul Harver as Dr. Floyd Mason, Charles B. Griffith, our writer, as Dr. Pete Shelton, Thomas E. Jackson as George Haskell, Marshall Bradford as Secretary Platt, David McMahon as General Carpenter, and Paul Blaisdell, uncredited, as the monster.
Our movie opens with a title. No cold opening for this one. We know right away that it conquered the world.
Spoiler. And it's in my very favorite font, Comic Sans. We list the cast and crew, and then we open up in a control room where several lab-coated scientists are watching monitors that show nothing and talking about a satellite launch.
They're preparing for the launch of a satellite, and Dr. Paul Nelson reveals that all planes should have been cleared 20 minutes ago, so they should be prepared to launch. We learn that this is a $9 million satellite project.
A 5-year project, too.
Next, we're introduced to the character of Dr. Tom Anderson, played by Lee Van Cleef.
It is most weaselly.
He comes into the general's office to argue about the satellite launch.
Apparently, this is a military base that the control room is set within. He's there arguing with the military brass about this satellite launch, which is seconds away from happening. So he's really missed his opportunity. However, he's very incensed that this is happening. He's written papers about what a terrible idea this is. It's too late. It's seconds away from blasting off.
And he's a character that no one really has any respect for, even though he had worked on the Manhattan Project and has a whole history of similar credits. But some of his ideas have been downright loony. So a lot of people have a difficult time taking him seriously.
Yeah, he calls himself involuntarily retired. You can see the air quotes outside those words when he says them. This is the second time they've attempted this satellite launch. The first one exploded in orbit, and Tom claims that this is because the aliens don't want us to launch satellites. They're the ones preventing that from happening. So if we do launch one, we're going to be going against what they want.
He says that alien intelligence will see a satellite launch as a threat, and that humans are harmless to everyone but themselves as long as they stay on Earth.
Right. And as you can imagine, that just makes him sound like a loony to the military guys. They really pay him no mind, and he leaves unsatisfied after this encounter.
Before he leaves, the satellite launches.
Well,
so that's how close he cut it.
Right. Well, I did say it was seconds away.
But he doesn't seem to know it's seconds away because they tell him it's launching any second now, and then there it goes.
I mean, he should have come the day before, obviously. According to the military, there is no life that we know of on other planets. Tom's not convinced of that, though.
Cut to 3 months later, and Dr. Paul Nelson and his wife Joan are joining the Andersons for dinner.
Everything goes pretty swimmingly at first. These are apparently very good friends, but unfortunately, Tom has something he wants to share with Paul. Claire knows what it is, and she practically begs him not to, right there at the table. But he's not going to listen to her.
He and Paul go into the other room to leave the women to do the dishes. And Tom shows Paul a radio receiver from which he is receiving signals from Venus.
And if that wasn't enough of a wow moment, we also find out that amidst the signals of, it sounds like just tuning noises, Tom hears a voice. And not only that, he's conversing with the speaker.
But Tom seems to be the only one who can make out this voice.
Whatever's being said, Tom's translating. We don't hear what's happening. But before that can be processed, Paul gets a phone call at Tom's house.
The caller says that the satellite went on a tangent and disappeared into space. So Paul needs to rush back to the lab to try to figure out what's going on.
On the way out, though, Paul's wife, Joan, notes that Tom is particularly crazy tonight. Not in so many words, but that's how I interpreted it.
They have to go back and find the scientific achievement of the century.
There's a series of quick cuts. We see the 3 scientists that aren't Paul at Mission Control attempting to find the satellite. General Pattick is there. Then we cut back to Tom and Claire's house. Claire's very ticked off at Tom. She says, "You promised." And then we see Paul arriving at the control room.
When Paul gets there, he finds that the satellite is back somehow. And there will be an investigation to determine where it went and why.
Then we cut back to Tom, who's back on the radio with the Venusian.
It says in that language that only Tom can understand that it has boarded the satellite and is hitching a ride to Earth.
Apparently it grabbed the satellite, took it to Venus, hijacked it, and it has come back. Tom offers his friendship. Claire walks in at this moment, says, "Come to bed, honey." She clearly thinks that he's kind of bonkers. He's not going to go to bed. He wants to stay within listening range of the radio.
But nonetheless, he says he will be available to speak after sunrise, which would be relevant, I would think, to your location. And the Venusian is still somewhere in space, so I don't know how the Venusian is supposed to know when the sun rises.
Unless it's in geosynchronous orbit with wherever Lee Van Cleef is.
So Tom ends up sleeping on the couch. Claire throws a blanket over him.
She's so nice.
And back at the lab, they're trying to retrieve the satellite, but they're having difficulty. It's not responding to the controls they're sending it.
It's almost as if something else is piloting it.
And we see the satellite crash into a hillside. It looks like a 50s sci-fi era flying saucer.
It looks like the projection of a 50s era sci-fi flying saucer. It's just basically a piece of light and then an explosion, and it's crashed into the hillside.
Anderson receives a call on his radio. The Venusian survived the crash.
Phew.
Claire tells him that he's a sick man. And Tom is anxious to tell Paul about this turn of events.
He wants Claire to make the phone call for him, but she's not going to do that. She's going to go into town. So she stomps off.
Next, we see a large cucumber with tentacles and lobster claws walk through a cave. As he waves his arms, all mechanical objects stop working.
This is truly the best moment of the film when we finally get to see the Venusian that's going to conquer the world. And it's frankly ridiculous. It's the silliest looking thing. But I guess we deal with what we have. It stops a train in its tracks. It stops the clocks. It stops forklift from lifting something up. Newspapers aren't printing anymore.
Wire services aren't wiring.
And cars are stopping in their tracks.
Including Paul and Joan's car. Paul opens the hood to try to see what the problem is. And as he's looking and can't figure it out, Joan points to the sky. There's a plane in distress.
Yeah, the plane just falls right out of the sky, crashes to the earth. Their watches stopped. And their level of concern is to note what time it is in case somebody asks them later. And then we never hear about it again.
It's 3 after 3.
They decide they're going to walk since their car's not going to run. And then we're back at Tom's place. So he's back on the radio telling the Carrot who the key personnel in town are that need to be controlled.
The people that he lists off are the mayor, the sheriff, the general in charge of the base, and Dr. Paul Anderson, and the wives of the 4 of them.
Of course, you have to include the wives. It's not a party unless you add them.
So now the Venusian / cucumber/carrot lifts its skirt, and some little flying stingrays come out, and they take to the sky. These are the mind control devices that Tom was alluding to.
When I first watched this, I thought, wow, are those its babies? It looks like it's kind of giving birth. Whatever they are, they're off on their mission. We cut to town where there's a rush at the market. People are gathered in the square. They want to know what happened. Claire is spotted, and people ask her what her husband knows about this, because I guess everyone knows that he's a crazy science guy.
Apparently, Tom has written about the possibility of mechanical devices dying and what that would do to mankind. They think because of that, in some way, Tom must be responsible for this.
You can imagine if this movie came out today, he'd have a YouTube channel devoted to all his kooky theories.
Another woman comes up to the sheriff and is distressed because her husband is in an iron lung, but it's stopped. So he advises her to go back, run it by hand, and he'll try and get her some help.
How do you crank it or something? At this point, Tom pops up amidst this melee. He calls out to Claire, and then he himself gets decked because someone knows who he is and figures he's at least partly responsible for what's going on.
The sheriff breaks it up, and he and Claire leave together.
Paul and Joan are still walking. This is set in the canyons of California, so there's a great distance between everything in this movie. They're out walking, and they see one of the little rubber bat thingy drones flying around.
It must be some kind of cave bat.
Paul throws a rock at it, but doesn't hit anything.
And if he remembers, he'll ask Tom about it because Tom is well versed in zoology.
Also, they're on their way to his house. Tom and Claire are returning to their home from town. And at this point, Tom confesses to Claire that nothing works anywhere, not even water. Claire runs up the stairs and turns on the hose and sprays it at Tom. And she's like, well, what are you talking about? The water works. And Tom's like, our water works, but everyone else's doesn't. Apparently, he's the only one exempt from all these outages.
We cut back to town, and we see the sheriff become the victim of one of those flying stingray bat thingies. It swoops down on him a couple times and then eventually lands in the back of his neck. The sheriff goes down, but then he immediately gets up, picks up the stingray, and throws it in a trash can.
Yeah, it's dead. It did its job.
And Paul and Joan finally made it to Tom's house.
Yeah, they've been walking for hours.
They would like for him to take him to the garage. They don't know that nothing is working yet. They think it's just their bad luck.
Tom says, no point in doing that. How about some drinks?
He asks what time the car broke down, and Paul asks him how he knew it broke down.
Tom's kind of gloating at this point. He knows everything they don't know, and he's really enjoying this moment of superiority over, I guess, another scientist who's obviously more successful than he is.
Back at the base, we learn the power inside the lab is still off. They have an auxiliary power, which is hand crank, and that doesn't work either. The general is going somewhere. He has to walk because the vehicles aren't working. And while he's out in the brush, one of those flying stingray bat things dives him a couple times and eventually gets him on the back of the neck as well.
He tries to defend himself by swinging at it with the butt of his gun instead of shooting it like, you think a soldier would. Back at Tom's, Paul has taken in everything that Tom has told him and basically sums up the movie for us viewers. A superior intelligence hijacked the satellite, crashed into Earth, shut down the world's power, and is about to take over the world. Paul asks why Tom isn't fighting the creature, and Tom says that the superior intelligence is a personal friend of his, and it's here to rescue mankind from itself.
He says it will overcome mankind's stupidity, and in so short a time that you'll hardly notice it's been done.
As if that could happen. Claire's a little sarcastic about this so-called friendship, and Tom has a bit of a, well, they won't be laughing at me now moment. He reminds Paul that he had a theory about something called degravitation. He never had a chance to prove his theory or even test it because it fell victim to Washington red tape.
Paul asks Tom to elaborate on how this being will become the savior to mankind, but Tom can't tell him of the plan just yet, so Paul doesn't feel he can be supportive of that, given the little information that he has.
No, but Tom does imply that Paul doesn't have any choice in the matter.
Paul wants to go back to the lab, but Tom says it's a useless endeavor because the lab is out of commission. So Paul asks Tom to drive him and Joan home. Tom tells them to wait out in the car and that he'll be out in a minute. This leaves Tom and Claire alone. And Tom notes that Paul wasn't alarmed when he heard this news.
Claire thinks Paul isn't overreacting because he's too logical to believe in his nonsense. Tom asks for Claire to have some faith in him because she's always doubted him. But Claire says she'll be on his side, not because she believes him, but because she loves him and she's his wife. So she kind of has to.
And she walks off and he kind of gives her a dirty look as she leaves. Then he goes back to his pickle communicator.
I was just going to say, the pickle calls Tom and tells it to trace the car to Paul's house, because obviously Paul is one of the targets. The general returns to the base from his little walkabout, and our guards, Sergeant Dick Miller and Private Jonathan Haze, are standing there. They're kind of the comic relief in this movie, so they have a few goofy lines here and there. So the general tells Sergeant Neal and Private Ortiz that the base is under martial law.
And defense measures should be taken. Against what? He can't say.
The base is being decommissioned, though, so that they all need to prepare to leave.
Now, this is the general under mind control.
So the general tells his underlings that they are to get ready to decamp at 16:30, 4:30. Private Ortiz asks how are they supposed to know what time it is? They don't have any working clocks. And the general gives them his watch, saying, oh, here, take mine, it's working. So obviously, he's one of the chosen ones now, too.
So the general goes into the lab and lets everyone know that they're in the middle of a communist uprising and that they've sabotaged every power source in the area. The scientists are confused as to how they've managed to sabotage things that weren't part of the main power grid.
Like flashlights or wristwatches.
The general doesn't know how they did it, but they did.
They also want to know how the general found this out because there couldn't be any wire communications from other sources.
He just deflects their questions and lets them know that they are under protective custody and that they will not be allowed to leave the base.
And they agree to that. Paul and Joan get dropped off at home. Tom is driving. Claire's in the car with him. Claire nags Tom about forming an enemy. Tom says there are no such thing as enemies anymore. And when Paul and Joan return home, they discover that everything really is out. And they discuss Tom's wacky theory.
Paul says Tom has wasted his entire life on ridiculous theories based on fantasy. And that two of them were bound to come true. They were all encompassing.
And he thinks this is just a natural catastrophe. And Tom is just trying to take credit to save face.
Because if one of his theories was correct, then they might as well all be correct. And it will vindicate himself to everyone who's laughed at him.
And that's what he really wants.
So Tom's back at home. He's in contact with the Venusian again.
He reminds the pickle to get Paul before he goes to the lab. Apparently the mind control devices that are out there are the only ones that can be sent at this moment. He can't make any more.
He also says that the cave that the Venusian is in is over a hot spring, thereby making it more in line with the climate of Venus. And he also asks for further instructions.
Well, those instructions are for him to stay put. So now we cut to town and there's a panic going on, as you might expect. People are running. Kids are dropping their baby dolls.
People are grabbing their saxophones and dearest possessions.
Oh, the humanity. The town's being evacuated by the sheriff.
Paul and Joan go outside to see what the commotion's about, and they see the crowd headed out of town. Paul runs into the crowd to find out what's going on, and he grabs the nearest guy, and this guy is just terrified and wants to get out of Dodge.
He says, let me go, they're after me. Now we're back with Sergeant Neal and Private Ortiz. They're out marching around when they get buzzed by one of the rubber bat thingies, but it doesn't bite them.
Nope, they weren't the targets.
Joan thinks that she and Paul should evacuate with the rest of the townspeople, but Paul says that that's what they want us to do. He tells Joan he's going down to the base and she should stay inside with the windows shut. He takes off.
On a bike.
Those work. But unfortunately, Joan doesn't have time to go inside and shut everything up. You see one of the bat drone things come for her, and while we don't see it actually happening, we hear her kind of squeak as if she'd been bitten.
Back in town, the sheriff is calling out to Haskell, who runs the local paper. Apparently, he's the last man standing. He's the only one who hasn't left.
He tells Haskell don't be difficult and threatens him with a gun. But gun or no gun, Haskell's not leaving. His paper got Shallert his job. And Shallert says there's no need for papers now. They're just a stack of ideas and notions. Useless. Kind of pertinent to life today, don't you think?
Haskell insists he's not going to leave. So Sheriff Shallert does the only thing he can do. He shoots him.
At this moment, Paul comes up behind the scene. He's aghast. He saw the cop kill Haskell in cold blood.
The sheriff said he did it on his orders.
And the sheriff wants Paul to come along with him in protective custody. He's not going to get shot because he's necessary. He says, you're to be one of us. You're free. And Paul gets to leave.
Back at the Anderson house, Tom is looking through a pair of binoculars. He's bird watching, kind of.
Bat watching.
He explains to Claire that the Venusian had let him know how the mind control devices work, and they fly like birds. So he's looking in the sky to see if he can see one. They plant neurological devices into their victims, and then they die like bees after stinging.
And that allows the benefactor, that's what he calls the Venusian, to control them.
Claire is a little distraught that Tom is willing to sacrifice everyone's minds for this new world order, and that human emotion will become a thing of the past.
She embraces Tom, and Tom seems to be enjoying that. And she asks Tom, why are you holding me? He says it's because he loves her. And she kind of turns the tables on him, saying, well, isn't that a waste? It's an emotion. Boom, a logic bomb dropped. She says you can't rub the tarnish from men's souls without losing a little bit of the silver. Tom tells Claire that even if there is no love between them, he'll still need her. He'll need her services, I guess. And as you can imagine, Claire takes offense to that. She says, why not just hire a woman who'll fit all your fetishes? And then if you get tired of that one, you can just go down to the employment agency and get a new one. And then she runs off.
And we don't know if Paul ever made it to the lab or if he just decided to go home after watching Haskell get shot. But he's on his way home now, on his bike, when the general comes by and offers him a ride. Paul accepts, and he's curious why the general's car is working.
He gives the best explanation ever. He's got an experimental rubber band engine in his Jeep. That's a dead giveaway that he's lying.
The general suggests that it would be better if Paul and the missus join the others at the base.
In quarantine.
Paul seems to think it's a great idea, but can he contact them?
And the general says, no, they can't do that.
They're under protective custody.
So before they pull completely away from the former base, Paul says, well, watch out for that rock in the road. The general stands up a little bit in the seat. And when he does that, Paul takes the opportunity to crush him on the back of the head, knock him out, and take over the one vehicle that works.
Yeah, he throws the general from the car.
Where he lands with a thunk.
And he heads back home to his wife. As he's going, he's pursued by one of those flying stingray bat things.
It swoops at him, and he does shoot at it, unlike the general, but he gets away. He doesn't even hit it.
He's a scientist.
He's not a sharpshooter.
So instead of going home, Paul goes back to Tom's house to call him a murderer.
Tom confesses that he's been helping the alien, and he admits there's only just the one on Earth, but there's 8 more of them on Venus. They're the sole survivors of some catastrophe on their planet. They were born too soon amid the boiling gases and eruptions of Venus, a planet that won't catch up to Earth climate-wise for 1 million years. Actually, I think Earth is pretty close to Venus right now. We're getting there.
Tom tries to justify his position by saying that every great change in history, every sudden leap in his station, has resulted in chaos, torment, and death. The French Revolution brought democracy to Europe, and plagues brought advances in medicine.
Yeah, and the atomic bomb, something. Look at the upside. But Paul's not convinced. Too many bad things have happened when all these drastic changes took place.
He also says that these changes were brought about by man, but this is an outsider who's causing these changes.
Yeah, an alien.
And he will not abide. And Paul calls Tom the greatest traitor of all time because he's not betraying part of mankind, but all of mankind.
Well, he's got a point. Tom offers Paul sort of a co-commander position in this new world order, but Paul's not having it. Paul says he won't kill his own soul and all within reach. He won't swear allegiance to this king. He'll fight it with his last breath. And he'll fight Tom, too. He belongs to a living race, not a dying one. He tells Paul that his hands are human, but his mind is enemy. And then he takes off. No one asks about Claire at this point.
Well, Claire is kind of there because she says...
Yeah, but no, he doesn't ask, like, hey, are you okay? Would you like to get away from the crazy guy and come with me? She's stuck with him.
Claire says to Tom, I hope you're proud.
And she reminds Tom that Paul really is a friend to him because Paul had a gun and didn't kill Tom.
Yeah, she says Tom received an undeserved stay of execution. She says again that she loves him, but she wants to love the man she married and not this crazy lunatic that he's turned out to be.
Who's selling out the earth for a tiny bit of power.
Then Tom receives another call on his pickle phone.
I love this alien.
And he says that Paul, his wife, Joan, the Mayor Thompson, and his wife are the 4 yet not under mind control. Upon hearing this news, the Venusian makes Paul's borrowed car stop, so he has to get out and bike the rest of the way home.
He sees Joan. She seems okay. She just got out of the shower, so she has a working shower.
He lights a cigarette because somehow that works.
When he asks her about the shower, she claims she just used water from a bucket to wash off. I don't know how she got the water. Supposedly no one has water. Then she mentions that there's a draft, and Paul notices that, that window is wide open.
He rushes to close it, and she says that she has a surprise for him.
She's got her hands behind her back. What could it be?
And she reveals one of those stingray bat things.
Oh, just what I always wanted.
So she lets it loose at him, and as it's flying around, she says she's going to go for a walk. And she'll be back in a little bit, and he'll be feeling much better by then.
He starts fighting it off. He grabs a fireplace poker and manages to impale the bat thingy against the wall with it, thus killing it.
And the exact second that he's skewering this thing, the phone rings. Paul picks it up and says this could only be Anderson. And Anderson is pretty smug and says, I have the only working phone left.
Except
that's not true because Paul's working.
Right.
The pickle had just told him that Paul killed the mind control device that was intended for him. And he won't be able to make another one to control him for another week. So he doesn't have anything to worry about for at least a week. So come on over. He'd like to apologize. Now, this pickle works fast because the phone rang the second that it was skewered.
Maybe he has a camera? I don't know. There's no way he could have known.
Well, he got the news, related to Tom. Tom made the phone call.
Yeah, and he had to dial.
Within a second. So Paul agrees that he'll go over, but there's something he needs to take care of first.
Tom informs the alien that Paul is coming, and then tells Claire that the alien told him that Paul is too great of a menace to live out the week. Tom is going to kill Paul. Claire is shocked at this.
Back at Paul's house, Joan comes back in.
She assumes that Paul has been bit in the meantime. She starts waxing rhapsodic about the impending conqueration of the world.
He asks her if it's always going to feel like this, and she says it will. They're going to be like this for the rest of their lives, and Paul can't have that, so he shoots her.
That's pretty cold, because he doesn't know for a fact whether this is a reversible condition. Like, can the mind control be turned off in any way? But we'll never have a chance to find out. Now we're in the woods with our small group of soldiers. They're camping, and Private Ortiz is still talking about the bat thingy that he saw flying around earlier.
The funny-looking bird. Back at the Anderson home, Tom is loading his rifle, waiting for Paul. Claire tells him that if he murders his best friend, he'd be killing her with the same bullet. She keeps going on, but he's just ignoring her. He's not speaking to her at all.
He closes off his machine. Then she really digs in, shaming him for being the servant for this pickle master. And Tom says that's enough. He puts on a record, enjoying the fact that he has the only working phonograph on Earth, apparently. And Tom says, you're making a difficult thing harder. And she says, I want it to be hard.
But he agrees to answer her questions in an attempt to try to get her to understand his position.
Tom says the alien is intelligent and can control subjects at a distance, and he gives away the location of the alien. It's at Elephant Hot Springs Cave, for the climate. Claire says, why would it even come to Earth if it can't inhabit it? Is the alien just there to control subjects?
And mind control isn't the end game here because there were only 8 mind control devices and Paul killed his. The one intended for the mayor and his wife were used elsewhere because apparently the 2 of them were killed off screen.
Yeah, during the panic evacuation struggle. Yeah, this is the first time we find out about that. They were never characters in the movie, so it doesn't really matter. We don't know who those 2 mind control devices are now going to get, and Tom won't tell Claire.
Back at the base, Dr. Ellen Peters is sleeping, and she rises to find the lab operational.
She throws her lab coat over her slip. They've been camped out there because they couldn't go home, so they're just making do with what they have. She goes out to talk to the other 2 scientists and get the 411 on what's happening. The other scientists say, well, it just started working. We don't know why. She asks if there's any coffee made, and like the good 1950s male scientists they are, they tell her to go make some.
Well, one does. The other realizes where she's headed and says, I'm not thirsty. Don't make any.
Because where she's going is their coffee cabinet. She opens the door and sees 2 dead bat thingies. She screams, and one of the scientists is right behind her.
Said scientist strangles her while the other one is
communicating with the cucumber, right?
Yeah.
It's a really creepy scene because her lab coat falls off, so she's in a slip, and he's violently choking her. And in the background, this other scientist is just having sort of a blasé conversation with this alien thingy. I would say this is the most disconcerting scene in the movie. What we do find out from this conversation is that physical contact with Venus has been established, and Paul Nelson will direct the operation using encephalopathic control. I believe this mission is to bring the rest of the Venusians down to Earth. I don't think Paul's ever going to get to the lab, though.
No, because Paul arrives back at Anderson's house.
Claire still can't believe that Tom is going to kill his friend.
She reminds him that she's proven that this Venusian is a coward, and it's having Tom do all its dirty work.
Because it can't.
But Tom feels he must stick with his convictions, and he goes out to meet Paul.
So Claire has a great moment here. She gets on the radio. Basically, she unloads on this alien. She tells the alien she hates it for what it's done to her husband and what it's doing to her world, and that she's going to kill it.
And as they pass the garage door opens, and Claire sneaks out, shotgun in hand.
Nice. Tom asks how Joan is, and Paul confesses that he killed her. And this really shocks Tom. He can't believe he did it because
if he had only submitted to the creature's bite, then they'd still be together. And if he hadn't destroyed it, and Paul interrupts and says, hadn't destroyed the thing that was trying to control me.
Paul says that Tom made Joan the enemy and he had to kill her because they're at war. And now he's going to kill Tom.
Paul pulls his gun on Tom, and he says that if he can get to the leaders, to Tom, to Shallert, to Pattick, the battle will be half won.
Yeah, that pickle won't have anyone to do its bidding anymore.
But Paul's going to try and get through to Tom one more time.
He tries to get Tom to come back to the side of the good here. Give him a chance.
He appeals to his humanity.
If he has any.
Hoping that he still has some.
Meanwhile, Claire is racing to the cave. The soldiers, still camped out, hear her car race by, but they're more concerned with finding some food. They send Private Ortiz out to wrangle some chickens.
Paul is still trying to work Tom.
He wants to find out where the pickle is hiding.
And he's still trying to reach Tom, saying that the Venusian doesn't understand emotion, but he exploits it. And Claire finally reaches the cave.
Tom is starting to waver. He realizes that the alien has been using him. And we cut back to Claire, who goes into the cave. There's a lot of quick cuts here.
And Claire finally comes face to face with the great pickle.
Claire says, so that's what you look like. You're ugly.
It seems to not like that because it lunges at her.
And then she raises her rifle and says, you think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first. She gets off like 3 shots.
But it does no good, and Claire is killed. But back at Tom's house, Tom and Paul can hear what's going on the
cucumber radio.
Pickle phone. This finally brings Tom to his senses, maybe, and they decide they're going to head to the cave and destroy this thing. Tom doesn't have a gun because Claire took his, but he says he'll find something.
So they split up and get in I guess they have 2 working cars now.
Ortiz is still looking for chickens. When he hears a scream from the cave, it does not sound like Claire.
It's sort of an unearthly noise. Maybe the pickle was screaming.
But he runs into the cave to see what's going on.
He shoots, and it doesn't do any good, so he runs back to his troop.
He says he saw a monster in a cave, and it just killed a girl. And instead of saying, what? Sergeant Neal just says, pack up men, we're moving out.
Good for him for being action-oriented. So Paul's first stop is not the cave. His first stop is the base, where he finds a dead, partially nude Ellen laying on the ground outside of the control room. And inside the control room, the general and the 2 scientists are expositioning about what's going to happen next. They're going to kill the president and the cabinet. And then Paul bursts in.
He shoots all 3 and doesn't linger to check his work. He leaves.
He should have checked his work because the general is down but not out. And he follows.
So now Paul's headed back to the cave because there's one more to take care of.
Tom's on his way too, but he can't go through because someone's blocking the road. It's the sheriff, Shallert. He's got his car parked in the middle of the road so no one can pass.
And back at the cave, the soldiers are entering. Paul's hiding in the brush, and he shoots General Pattick as he drives by, which gives him the opportunity to take his Jeep. And back at the cave, the soldiers are now shooting at the pickle.
But that doesn't do any good. And then Tom takes out a blowtorch and uses it on the sheriff. The sheriff catches fire and runs away. At this point, Tom takes off on foot towards the cave with his blowtorch.
Back at the cave, the soldiers are still firing. One decides to charge at the pickle and is immediately taken out. Sergeant Neal instructs them to fire and fall back. So they're still shooting as the pickle exits the cave.
Yeah, they kind of draw him out. And then Tom arrives.
He asks Sergeant Neal to stop shooting.
Well, it's not doing any good.
Sergeant Neal says, "Are you crazy?" But he sees that Tom has a blowtorch, so I guess he's willing to try something else. So he orders his men to stop shooting.
Tom addresses the cucumber here. He says, "I welcomed you. I made it possible for you to come here, and you turned my world into a charnel house," which I guess is sort of like a crematorium, sort of.
And with that, he sets the pickle ablaze.
He burns it right in its eyes, and then some icky goo comes out.
But the pickle uses the last of its energy to take Tom with him.
They both fall over. And then our hero, Paul, finally gets there. He performs his only service in this movie, and that's to deliver a monologue. Sergeant Neal tells Paul that Tom acted like he knew the alien.
He says he did know it, he and no one else.
And then we get this classic closing monologue from Peter Graves. As Paul Nelson, he says, "He learned almost too late that man is a feeling creature, and because of it, the greatest in the universe. He learned too late for himself that men have to find their own way, to make their own mistakes. There can't be any gift of perfection from outside ourselves. And when men seek such perfection, they only find death, fire, loss, disillusionment, the end of everything that's gone forward. Men have always sought an end to the toil and misery, but it can't be given, it has to be achieved. There is hope, but it has to come from inside, from man himself." The end. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about It Conquered the World from 1956. This movie was released on a double bill with The She-Creature. The taglines for this movie: "See, world conquered by horrible beasts from beyond the stars. See, the hideous flying fingers of the monster. Every man its prisoner, every woman its slave." And it originally received an X certificate. That was in the UK, which meant that it could only be seen by adults. And the reason was because of the creature being destroyed by a blowtorch scene.
The extreme gore.
So Samuel Arkoff had to convince the film board that since this wasn't violence against a human or an animal, but an otherworldly person, they shouldn't do that. He did get a passing certificate based on the strength of that argument.
Yeah, he somehow convinced them that he had scientific proof that this is what a Venusian looked like.
So the high point and low point of this movie is obviously the alien, the design of which is ridiculous, obviously. But there actually was a philosophy behind the reason that it looked the way it did.
Right. The thought was that the planet that it came from, in this case Venus, would have a higher gravitational pull, so it would sit lower to the ground.
But unfortunately, when they brought it out for testing finally, Beverly Garland stood next to it and realized that she could just kick it over. This is not something that could conquer anything. Legend says that she saw it and said, "That conquered the world?" And the reason that we jokingly call it a pickle or a cucumber or a carrot actually comes from Paul Blaisdell, who said that he reasoned that if Venus had any life, that due to its climate, it would be vegetable in nature.
Paul Blaisdell would also claim that he never expected the creature to be photographed in full light, so he wasn't that concerned with the way that it looked.
Its believability? No.
Wrongly believed.
Researching this, we found a funny little anecdote. He made the creature in his basement and then realized that it was too big to get out of his basement, so he had to disassemble it, take it outside, and then reassemble it before taking it to set. Now, the short, squat creature was redesigned so that it was actually about 10 feet tall. Roger Corman says that he learned a lesson to always make your monster taller than your leading lady. And Paul Blaisdell himself was inside the costume during all the scenes where we saw it moving around. And he almost got murdered, accidentally. In the bayoneting scene, one of the soldiers stuck a bayonet into the wrong spot and nearly skewered Blaisdell's skull as he operated it. Luckily, Blaisdell's wife had persuaded him to don a helmet for protection, and that deflected the blade.
The creature's working pincers were broken on the first day of shooting, but its arms could still be raised. So that's really all we see the creature do is raise his arms. And the melting eye socket effect was completed using chocolate syrup.
I heard that's what they used in Psycho, too, instead of fake blood.
Because it looks nice and dark when shot in black and white.
Paul Blaisdell referred to the monster as Beulah. A good portion of Beulah disintegrated due to the shoddy care taken to store it, and whatever was left of it was destroyed in the fire scene finale of AIP's 1958 film, How to Make a Monster. The little bat-like creatures that the monster uses to control people would later be reused in Corman's film The Undead the following year.
And as we know, Roger Corman liked to reuse several of his cast members in other productions, and several of these productions would be for American International Pictures. So Beverly Garland had also appeared in The Gunslinger previously, and would go on to appear in Naked Paradise, aka Thunder Over Hawaii. Sally Fraser, who played Joan, would appear in Earth vs. the Spider and War the Colossal Beast, both for Bird Eye Gordon. We would see Russ Bender in Drag Strip Girl, Invasion of the Saucer Men, The Amazing Colossal Man, War the Colossal Beast, Hot Rod Gang, Ghost of Dragship Hollow, Panic in Year Zero, Devil's Angels, Wild in the Streets, and The Young Animals, a.k.a. Born Young.
Hey, we've done a few of those. Jonathan Haze was another Corman favorite, and he was in Five Guns West, Apache Woman and The Day the World Ended, as well as Gunslinger, Oklahoma Woman, Naked Paradise, Rock All Night, Viking Woman versus the Sea Serpent, and Teenage Caveman, and of course Dick Miller. We've seen him in tons of AIP movies. We've even featured him in a couple of our episodes, like Bucket of Blood, The Terror of the Wild Angels.
Taggart Casey would appear in Sergeant Deadhead in 1965, and Marshall Bradford had appeared in The Fast and Furious. I was a Teenage Frankenstein and Teenage Caveman.
As for the reception of this movie, Charles B. Griffith, who wrote part of it, said, "I asked for my name not to be on that picture, so I was unbilled. Surprisingly, it got good reviews. Variety called it a cut above normal, saying it should pull its weight at the box office despite a modest budget. It must be admitted that the packed house of Moppets at the show loved the gore and continually shrieked avid appreciation. The Lou Rusoff screenplay poses some remarkably adult questions amidst the daring do. Corman does a generally good job of mingling the necessary background setting with fast-paced dialogue. Only a few patches of abstract discussion fail to hold audience attention. Corman would have been wiser to merely suggest the creature rather than construct the awesome-looking and mechanically clumsy rubberized horror. It inspired more titters than terror."
Film historian and critic Leonard Maltin called It Conquered the World well acted and interesting, but awkwardly plotted.
Well, we've heard what Leonard Maltin has to say. What do you have to say, Jeff, about It Conquered the World?
I have to say, It Conquered the World is really a pretty solid movie. It might be surprising to hear this. I mean, obviously, the creature looks more than ridiculous, but who am I to say what a Venusian does or doesn't look like? I've never seen one.
That you know of.
And if somebody was to explain that Venus would be more compatible to a plant life and that it had a higher gravitational pull, which meant that being from there would have a lower center of gravity. Okay, yeah, I might buy that this is a legitimate Venusian. Probably not, but I might. This is a very dialogue-driven movie. I found it very difficult to take notes on it because everything was happening so quickly. The same thing happened with Bucket of Blood, so maybe this is just something with the Corman films. I'll have to see as we go along. But the dialogue in this, for the most part, I'd say is pretty smart. If you think about a lot of these quote-unquote cheesy movies from this time period, a lot of it is attributed to the wacky dialogue. And there is a little bit of that in this, sure, in the way Paul and Joan talk to each other. Her identity is basically the wife of a scientist. But there isn't that much of it because she's not in the picture very long. While it may not have intentionally been the Cold War allegory that it's been called since, it nevertheless does work as that, and it still stands today. The scene where Paul comes home and finds that his wife, Joan, has been taken over by this mind control device. She's downright creepy in this scene. She's just smiling big, and the lighting is kind of weird and shadowy, and it's very effective. So on my AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic, I'm actually going to give this an A for awesome. Despite the ridiculous-looking creature, that might actually work in its favor because, as we've said before, we're grading these on their entertainment value and not necessarily on their value to film history. But even just taking it at entertainment value should give it some value to film history. So I'm going to give this my highest rating, A for awesome. What did you think, Cheryl?
I think I should have gone first because you kind of stole all my ideas and my rating too, because I give this an A. The first time I watched it was as part of Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they make great sport of the hilarious monster. But watching it on its own, it still holds up as a good movie. It is entertaining, and it does actually have some thoughtfulness behind it. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of parallels to things that are happening today. And obviously, they're not intentional. The movie made in 1956. And the sort of political climate of 2023 shouldn't have a lot in common, and yet they do, where people are being controlled by outside forces and betraying their friends, their family for these strange ideas. So I found a lot to enjoy just on that level. And then, even though I've seen it before through Mystery Science Theater, the first time you see the little carrot monster, you can't help but laugh. It's so funny. And yet it still works. It still holds together as a threat because somehow this creature has enough power to shut down the world as we know it. And even though it's kind of silly that it only has 8 mind control devices and they're using it on 4 minor functionaries and their wives, that doesn't seem like that would really give you control of the entire planet. It still feels like a threat. There's no water. Everyone has to be evacuated to a place where they can survive. And we're just basically under new management here. And we welcome our new carrot overlord. So I got a lot of enjoyment out of watching this movie. And that's what I'm here for. I'm here for fun. I'm here for movies that may technically not be that great, but still provide me with a good time watching them. And It Conquer the World definitely delivers a good time. I totally recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. It's loads of fun. It's a good movie. It's on a small budget. You can't hold it up to the same standard as a huge budgeted movie from today. It's not fair. So take it as it is. A silly carrot monster conquering the world, but a good script and some really great performances. I have to mention Beverly Garland is freaking awesome in this movie. We didn't really talk a lot about her as a performer. She has the best lines in the movie. She's not going to be a collaborator like her husband. She's going to go down shooting, and she's doing what she can to save her world. And I really admire a movie made in 1956 that made her not the damsel in distress. She is the hero of this movie. And even though she's ultimately not the one who brings down the stupid pickle, she's still the only one who's got the courage of her convictions and the guts to do something, even though it did get her killed. She risked death. She did die, but she went down with a fight. And I love that about this movie. And she's fantastic in it. And I love that there's a female scientist. There's a female military person. So I really like I guess you can't really say diverse casting, but I like that there are people of the female gender in this movie. And they aren't just wives like Joan. They actually are important to the plot. Definitely give this an A. Love this movie. You should watch it if you haven't already.
So it may not have successfully conquered the world, but it conquered our hearts. And with that, we wrap up this episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.